We're here today in this congregational town hall to explore our vision together. And as we get started, I wanted to share a story with you, or I guess maybe an image, an idea. And I've been reading a book called Canoeing the Mountains. It's a book by a man named Todd Bolsinger, and it's a book intended for churches as they think about what it means to be the church and how to be faithful to God's call in the church in our place and time. And he uses a metaphor, a story that follows Lewis and Clark. Perhaps you're familiar with your third grade, history, the story of Lewis and Clark and going up the Missouri River to explore the Louisiana Purchase, but not just to explore. They were given a charge by Thomas Jefferson, and they were charged to find the water passageway through the Northwest to get to the Pacific Ocean. Right? They're supposed to find the water passageway to the Pacific Ocean. Now, we all know that there is no such water passageway, but they didn't know that. And so they went up the Missouri River, and they took with them canoes and boats and lots of supplies, a well-trained crew that knew how to navigate the rivers. And they slowly wound their way up the Missouri. And after a journey that lasted for 15 months, they finally got to the source of the Missouri River. And if you go today to the border of Montana and Idaho, you can actually find a little plaque that says, "Source of the Missouri River, discovered by Lewis and Clark." And that day when they found the source of the mighty Missouri River, one of the longest rivers in the world, at this point it was just a tiny little rivulet coming out of a spring, and one of the men in the party of Lewis and Clark kind of stood with one foot on either side of the rivulet and said, "I must stride the mighty Missouri." And the idea was, as they approached the Continental Divide, just a short rise ahead, they would expected to see on the other side a river much like the Missouri to take them over and down into the Pacific. But when they climbed that rise, instead of finding a lush plain with a river valley in the middle of it, they saw what no American to that point had ever seen: the mighty Rocky Mountains. Mountains as far as the eye could see. And members of their party wrote in their journals things like, "The most terrifying mountains I've ever seen in my life." Now, Lewis and Clark still had the charge given to them by Thomas Jefferson to find a passageway to the Pacific Ocean. But they didn't see any way that they would be able to use their canoes in the immediate future. And so they were really left with three choices. One choice was to say, well, we've gone as far as we can. Maybe we'll, build a fort here, hunker down, maybe even head back to Washington and say what we found, sort of abandon the quest for now. Second choice would be to pick up the canoes and haul them through the Rocky Mountains. I mean, after all, this was a waterway trip, right? The third choice was to leave behind the canoes and to begin to do things that they hadn't trained for, to go into territory that was entirely unknown, and yet hold true to the purpose for which they had been sent. And as you may know, that third choice is the one that they selected. Now, the metaphor for the church is exactly this. Our culture is changing around us, as we all know so much, and it seems as though we are at a point in which we have been riding rivers for the last 500 years or more as a church. But we've reached the end of that river. And And the question is whether we're going to continue on the quest with the same purpose, but with a journey that might look very different. We don't know the way. We don't know what skills exactly we'll need. It may require skills that we haven't developed or used before. Are we going to turn back and say we've gone far enough? Are we going to try to bring the canoes of our experience and our strengths and haul them with us and try to lug them over the mountains, or are we going to leave the canoes behind and set out with new skills, a new sense of adventure, a new sense of risk? And that's really what this is all about today. Being clear on what God has called us to do and where God has called us to go, so that we can leave behind the canoes and pick up the skills to stay true to what God has called us to do. So here's what we're gonna accomplish today. First of all, we're going to just review our New Beginnings progress to date. For some of you, you know pretty well what we've been doing. And we're just going to give a brief check-in. For others of you, this may be all new information, but we just want to let you know how far we've come on our journey to date. And then secondly, we're going to explore this vision for the future that we've been talking about in church the last couple weeks. And then finally, we're going to take an opportunity to discuss what this means for us as a church. So now I'd like to call Wendy up, and she's going to share with us sort of how we've gotten here and review our progress to date.
Good afternoon. I think, for many of you, much of what I'm going to say is going to be review, and review, but I'm sure there are a few people that have either sort of been in and out of the process or weren't here for the very beginning, and so I'm going to actually start back to where Andy was new in our midst. And the leaders of the church learned about this discernment tool that the PCUSA would provide to churches that were in some state of stuckness. Either financial issues were keeping them from doing what they wanted to do, or their demographics were changing, or their mission seemed to be not reaching the people they wanted to reach, or whatever it may be. And it was not something that they prescribed, if you are this, then you do New Beginnings. It was just basically, if you feel that you could use this tool, here it is. So with Andy's arrival, and with us knowing that, not only Chestnut Grove, but the church at large was pretty much at a crossroads, particularly with the advancement of technology and so on, we thought that this would be a good thing for us to do. So in Andy's first year, we actually began to explore this, and then the first thing that the tool offered was a very deep assessment of the church as it was at the moment. Including its resources, both human and financial, its demographics, the neighborhood and beyond, and so on. So what that brought to us was Reverend Henry Kim, who came here for an extended period of time, spoke with many people in the congregation, did a great deal of walking and driving around the neighborhoods, just getting a very deep view of where Chestnut Grove was right then. And that was happening at the end of 2015. So his assessment was written in a really interesting document, which most of you have seen, maybe a lot of you have. But if you haven't seen it, it's really worth a look. It's got a lot of graphics. It's got some really interesting information about just who Chestnut Grove was in November of 2015. So at the top, it says New Beginnings Assessment, all right? So that was Reverend Kim's feedback to us. Now, from that was just the beginning, because from that, we were then to take this information and digest it as a congregation. And so we put together several small groups that ended up engaging almost 50 people from our congregation, which is a very good representation of our congregation at the time. And we had small group leaders that had specific ways of actually looking at this information and diving into it. And that happened in the spring of 2016. So it started with a town hall sort of like this, and then went off into the small groups, and the small groups met for about 6 weeks. And then after that, the information from the small groups came together, and there was an even smaller group that actually put all of the information from the small groups together in another report that looks a little bit like this, but it's not this. It actually, I don't have one with me right now, but it's available online on our website. That's called the New Beginnings Report to the Congregation. And what that was saying was extremely important, because after the small groups got together and went through the information that was included in Dr. Kim's report, it was very clear from every small group, and the small groups did not meet, they met concurrently, so they each group had their own personality, their own participants. But every group came to the conclusion that in order for Chestnut Grove to really grow into the future, we needed to redefine our mission as a church. And particularly, we needed to redefine it locally, that we would have more outreach and more engagement with our immediate community in Jacksonville. And just to remind you, those of you who have read this report have seen this before, but this statement comes right out of that report. And this is a reminder that this was a relatively unanimous decision among all of the people in the congregation. Participants uniformly recommended Chestnut Grove redefine its mission to change the focus of the church from its own membership to an outward missional focus that engages with, meets the needs of, and extends God's love to the greater Jacksonville community. Okay? Any questions about that? So that's basically the starting gun for the New Beginnings process for, okay, now what? It's time for session now, your ordained elected leaders, to really take that edict and make it a reality. So the first thing that session had to do was say, okay, what is our process for this? We haven't gone through this before, so what is our process? And we do have some still clear guidelines from New Beginnings, which is really wonderful. That's one of the great things about the tool. It doesn't just leave you, at a certain point, but at a certain point you do have to take on your own work, your own personality, and your own mission. So this is an illustration of what session came up with, and this is actually a summarization of what's in the session's response is actually in that report, in the report of the congregation. So this is basically a summary of what we decided to do. We decided that it would take 3 phases to go through this. We also knew we had our 175th anniversary coming up, so we wanted to be sure that we were honoring and including that in what we were about to embark on. And we also knew that given Presbyterian polity and given the amount of work that it was going to do, that was going to need to be done, that it was very likely going to take a while, and so we wanted to be very realistic about that. So the overall plan was to take 3 to 5 years in 3 phases. And the first phase of prayer and preparation had several things that we actually have mostly accomplished, and that's what I'd like to bring you up to date on. As you can see from the graphic there, that we actually are in phase 2 right now, so you have sort of an idea of what we're doing. But in the first phase, we had some specific things that we were trying to accomplish. One was, of course, letting the congregation know this was our plan. And that happened in a town hall similar to this in the summer of 2016 when we went over the report. We also needed to develop a long-term financial plan. That happened in the fall of 2016 with Carl Meck, our finance elder. We communicated that with the congregation, and there's more information about that from him. We're not going to go over that today, but that kicked off then as well in October of 2016. During 2016 and 2017, we formed a strategic prayer team. You probably most remember the Wednesday prayers that we took part in as a congregation and individually. We needed to further study the needs of our immediate community. We have some wonderful information in Dr. Kim's report, but there were some things that we wanted to be able to study from our perspective and from our experience in our own community. So that report actually was given to Session, which we'll be sharing a little bit of today, in November of 2017 by Janet Flanagan. We also wanted to explore potential partnerships in our area. We already know that we have good relationships with Boy Scouts and AA and many other community groups that come to our building. So we wanted to be able to really talk to people and assess our relationship with them. That was done by Carolyn Nibet and Steve Bankston throughout 2017. We also feel like our 175th anniversary activities were an outreach to our community. And then we needed to increase our focus on the strategic plan and what is the actual mission that we are trying to accomplish. So that is where phase 2 begins to come into view. So as we are in phase 2, we are the specific bullet points for phase 2 that we're trying to address right now are identifying this specific mission focus, define a vision that puts that focus in the center, and identify the core values that are central to our identity, to who we have been, are, and will be. And the vision statement that you've heard so much about in recent weeks is an outgrowth of those bullet points, and that's where we are right now.